I guess what I can do for those that don't know you, I'll give you a short introduction as much as I know you, Joey. Not we only recently met, but I think some we shared some ideas about community and things like that. That I really was eager to get you uh, on board to tell a story. I didn't know what the story ended up being, but whenever people reach out to me and are eager about being a part of Pi Data, I'm always a big proponent for them to give them the opportunity to express themselves in any way possible. And I think this whole journey is very creative, right? And I want this to be a creative outlet for people to tell how data has connected with them personally. And I think this is a perfect example of that, right? And these are the types of projects that I tell people when they ask me, how do you get a career as a data science? What are the projects that I want to focus on? And I tell them it's those passion projects that you want to focus on, those things that actually you would do that really move you. Those are the projects that you're going to spend up all night working on, those types of things. And so whenever I hear this story, I'm really excited and really glad that I have Joey here. So a little bit about him. He's an entrepreneur engineer from here in Salt Lake. I'm a little bit down in the slopes, but he's very passionate about outdoor sports. So we're going to be talking about trail running, but he loves skiing. He's an expert in taking new concepts and turning them into products. I wish that I could actually do that, but that sounds like just a great thing to be an expert of. And his work has been cited numerous times by major news outlets. And just a little bit background on his education. He has a doctorate degree in electrical engineering, so I should be calling you Dr. Wilson. And you can actually call me Dr. Wilson too. My middle name is Wilson, so we just
All right.
uh, from the University of Utah, and he's started a couple innovative companies here recently. That's pretty much it. I don't want to take too much time away, but Joey, if you could, I'm going to start recording. Um, and
For technology by these people across the street. Their names are the Holmstroms. And then this picture in the middle here is my dad. My dad was a mountaineer, still is, and he's on the line here watching this. So he was a guide in the Tetons. He did one of the first climbs in Little Cottonwood Canyon here in the valley. An original climber. And you can see this is a picture of us in the Tetons. And then my mom is an artist, and this is a picture down here in the right is a painting by Catherine Wilson, and you can see she's an amazing artist. And so my life has very much been shaped by these forces. It's these are the major influences of my life that have come together. So it makes sense that I've kind of ended up being a trail runner that loves to use data science and loves to dig into the engineering even of it. That's partly why I love the sport. So actually going back up here in these hills, right in the foothills of Salt Lake where I grew up, there's a race that has kind of slowed down a little, not slowed down, but stopped running since COVID. We're hoping to get it back next year, but it's called the Wasatch Steeplechase. And the Wasatch Steeplechase it's about a 30-kilometer race. So it's about 16 to 17 miles. And it's very technical. It's very steep. And it goes right up in the hillside behind City Creek in Salt Lake City and up into the foothills and then over a mountain called Black Mountain and then down the backside of Black Mountain into City Creek again. And it's a big loop. And they've been doing this race for decades. Since I was 10 years old, I remember my dad and his friends talking about the Wasatch Steeplechase. And it always seems scary to me because it is a hard race. And I finally got the guts to try this race. I had started to get into running. I ran in high school, but never really loved it. And somewhere in about the 2012, 2013, somewhere in those years, I decided I was going to go do this race. And I didn't have a lot of time to train for it. In fact, I only had a couple weeks. but I thought, how bad could it be? And I went out there, and that's my buddy Tony on the right. And we went for it. And my first round of the Wasatch steeplechase, I came in at about just under 4 hours. I think my time was like 3:58 or 3:56 or something. And it was hard. It was really hard. The following year, I did a little bit more preparation. So I was able to get on a little more running in. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just went out there and got a little bit fitter for the race. And that following year in 2014, I ran it in about 3:24, 3 hours and 24 minutes. And so you can see there was a huge improvement here in 2014. And this is what having a few more weeks to train will do, or actually doing a race with some amount of continuous training. The next year, I continued kind of that same pattern, and I got a little bit better, and I ended up just under 3:20. So I was at about 3:18. It was at about this point when I decided that I was really going to train hard for the following year. I had this idea that I could do it in under 3 hours. And I am by no means the fastest out there. There are guys that are running this in 2 hours and 12 minutes. I mean, they're just flying. I'm not an elite athlete. I'm an everyday runner. And I just decided I'm going to go train really hard. And I put myself out there and I trained really hard. And every time I ran, I was just exhausting myself. And as I went out in 2016, you can see what happened. Here's my data. So you see, I made this early progress, and then in 2016, after giving it my all of training, I went out and I ran as slow as I did in 2014. So not only did I have 3 more years of experience under my belt, but than the first year, but I also was regressing at this point. And I started to feel like, well, maybe I'm just getting older. I'm 42 now, but at the time I was only 36. And so I thought maybe I'm getting older, and maybe I'm just going to slow down by that much every year. And was pretty bummed about it, and just feeling like, why am I not getting better at this sport? I plateaued for quite a long time. My friends were beating me to the top of the mountain when they were barely training, and I was putting in a lot of hours and just coming up short. And so I was talking to my father here on the right, Ted, and we just were in the driveway, and he said, "How'd the race go?" And I said, it was bad. It was so bad. So tired, no, just misery the whole time. And he said he didn't really even have to ask much more. He basically just said, "You're overtraining." And he shared with me some of his training philosophy that he had learned from being a marathoner. And he basically said that he had gone out to train with some professional runners one day, and they were going at a normal pace for him. And the professional runner actually said, "Hey, Ted, I think we're going too hard. I think we should back off and go slower." And he was very surprised by that. And this is one of the counterintuitive truths that I have to share with everybody today, that the data is going to show. I think you're going to really enjoy the data if you like the numbers. So he said, so my dad basically gave this recommendation of, why don't you go just run easy for most of the time, and maybe once a week you can throw in some harder running, but just keep it easy and see what happens. So I put it to the test. And that following year, 2017, you can look at this curve and you can see that I dropped my time from 3:24 in the previous year all the way down to about 3:07. So I had massive improvement after that advice. And that was kind of the turning point in my understanding of running and my understanding of human physiology and how our energy systems actually work. And this came after, just basically going into the season with mostly easy and doing what my dad said. And as the race got closer, I did do some speed work in that year. And the funny thing that happened was I kind of convinced myself, after having all this success, I had this idea that, maybe if it must have been the speed work that was helping me. Like the last little bit of weekly speed work that I was doing, I convinced myself that that is what led to my progress, not the easy running. Because we've been conditioned in our society to think that extreme pain in our fitness is going to get us to a point where we do better because of how hard, like no pain, no gain. And so, that was a hard thing to beat out of me. I did not understand that. If somebody wouldn't mind muting, that would be great. I'm getting a little bit of a noise going on. So I convinced myself that it wasn't the easy running that made me faster. It was the hard running that made me faster. So I went out and I said, okay, well, I'm going to do a bunch of speed work again. And this was one of the most miserable races of my life. This picture of me laying on the ground was not actually during the race. This was when I raced my nephew to the top of Ensign Peak, and we were both it was the most miserable thing one of the most miserable things we've ever done. And I said to myself after the race in 2018, not the nephew thing, I'm never running again. I came in at the finish line of the Wasatch Steeplechase, and I had prioritized my high intensity going in. I had not prioritized the low intensity, the easy, and just didn't. You can see that I still ran it in about 307, but the amount of pain that I went through to get to this 307 compared to, say, the 2017 race was enormous. Like this one really, I just remember collapsing in the shade on the side of the finish line and just laying there for a long time. So I finally was like, okay, it's not the speed work, it's the easy. And right about this time, this amazing book came out. It's called Training for the Uphill Athlete. And Training for the Uphill Athlete is really, it's a mountaineering book. It's for people who want to run in the mountains. But this book does such an excellent job of explaining the human physiology of how our energy systems work and how they should be trained. And when I got this book, it really took the content to heart, and I started tracking every run that I did. I mean, I was already tracking every run that I did, but I started really paying attention, and I started doing these little time trials. And I had this little section of trail above my house, and I would go warm up, and then I would go run this, and I would run it at an easy rate. So I would make sure that I wasn't pushing myself as I ran. And I would just start my watch and look at what times I would get as I finished this little section of trail. And I wouldn't let my heart rate go. At the time, I wouldn't let it go above about 150 beats per minute. That was kind of like, if I looked down and I saw that my heart rate strap that I was wearing was telling me that I was over 150, I would actually slow myself down. And the first time I did this trial, hey, Larry, I just want to make sure everybody can still hear me because I'm looking at the screen and I can't see anybody. Are we still good?
We're still good.
Okay, cool. So the first time I ran this, and by the way, if anybody wants to interrupt with a question along the way, by all means, just speak up. Let me know. So you can see the first time I tried this little section of trail, I did it in about 8 minutes and 30 seconds. And I marked it down, and I just kept training easy, and I would try to get as many hours of easy running in. I just completely let go of any need to try to run hard. I actually avoided it. I said, I'm not going to run hard. I'm not going to let my heart rate go up too much for a long time here. And over the course of, let's see, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, you can see how much faster I was able to run this little section of trail while keeping my heart rate at the same rate at about 150. So what that basically meant is my speed was getting way better. my intensity and the perceived exertion was staying low and my speed was increasing. And that's really the magic. You know, these professional runners are able to run extremely fast and they're not suffering. They're not just able to suffer more than you or I. They actually have much more power output for the same level of suffering. And this, so you can see this in my numbers, and you see this how it goes way back up right here. Well, this is the date right here that I ran the 2019 steeplechase, the Wasatch steeplechase, right here. And so this is, you can see my recovery. I checked my times the week after, and you can see that my body was going through some serious recovery. And so my times were actually slower in this area right here. And you can see that I've made, this is what I call heartbeat speed. So what I do is I take, you know, how many meters am I able to go? If my heart rate's at 150 beats per minute, you know, how far can I go with one beat of my heart? And you can see that when I started this, I was down in this about, you know, 0.65 meters per heartbeat on this segment. And now it's trended upward. I've stopped testing myself, but I frequently do much better. And you can see that the trend over many years, over the last couple of years, is on the up. So I've made continuous progress. So let's look at the 2019 steeplechase. And you see right here, I ran it in about 3:05. And I remember feeling pretty good. So I made some progress that following year. And then in 2020, they canceled the race for COVID, but I just went out on my own. And without having any support from the race, I was able to run it in 3:02. And I remember coming into the finish line and looking at my watch and seeing 3:02 and being a little annoyed at myself that I didn't push it just a little bit harder at the end to get under my 3-hour goal, because there I am just knocking at the door. And you can see that since I've really taken this idea of low intensity training to heart, I'm making continued progress. I'm now 6 years older. I'm now 42. I was 36 back when I had this terrible, you know, regression. And yet, as I'm getting older, I'm actually getting faster. I'm able to do harder runs. I'm able to move quicker in the mountains thanks to this training philosophy. And the data, at least my data, I mean, and I think what we'll see is that this actually applies in general to humans. There's some really great science behind this. So now the question really is, well, why? And it comes down to, there are two ways that our bodies are able to move our muscles. One is called aerobic metabolism, and you've probably heard this, but the aerobic metabolism requires oxygen. And so the fat molecules, let's say, so we've got two energy sources in our body. We have fat and we have sugar. And sugar and carbohydrates are essentially the same thing. They're the same path. Sometimes they're called carbohydrates, sometimes we call them sugars, but it doesn't matter. Let's just talk about fat and sugar. When we burn fat, our body pulls in oxygen through our lungs, and that oxygen becomes part of the reaction that releases the electrons, and those electrons actually go into the cells that create the mechanical motion of our muscles. And that's done through the mitochondria. And without oxygen, you can't burn fat. It's just like fire. If you take away the oxygen, the reaction stops completely, and you're left with fuel that is not able to be burned. So that is what happens here with fat and oxygen. Now, there's also the sugar burn pathway, and this is where it gets pretty interesting. If you take a molecule of sugar and you break it in the first, this is called glycolysis. The first little reaction it goes through releases about 2 ATP. So ATP is the unit of energy of our body. It's a chemical. It stands for adenotriphosphate or something like that. I forgot the exact name. Adenosine. Thank you. Yes, I was close. Thank you. So over here you see fat. Fat releases over 100 of these units of energy. It requires oxygen, but the sugar, it only releases 2. And in fact, it takes 4. It takes 2 to create the reaction, and it releases 4. So you net 2. That's not a lot of energy. But the good news here is that it didn't require any oxygen right here. So this is called the anaerobic. This is an anaerobic process. Nothing needs to happen, no lungs. And you can experience this if you were to just get up and sprint right now and run 50 meters right now as hard as you can. Your lungs will take a few seconds to kind of ramp up. You don't need the oxygen directly in your muscles in order to get anaerobic systems to work. I mean, that's what they're for. They are utilized when our body does not have oxygen available, which is obviously super useful for the human body. The problem is there's not a lot of energy, so you burn these sugar molecules really quickly, and you're left with the molecule right here called pyruvate. And pyruvate is like a partially broken down sugar. It's got a lot of chemical bonds that are worth a lot of energy, but the problem is to get that further energy to happen, you need oxygen and you need mitochondria. And so if you are not aerobically trained, if your body does not have these adaptations of dense mitochondria and delivery of oxygen, then what happens is you run really hard and this pyruvate just sits in your bloodstream, and eventually little hydrogen ions break off of it and it becomes acidic. And this is known in literature as lactic acid. Lactic acid is a kind of inaccurate term. It's used kind of sloppily, but that's okay for understanding this. You're wasting this energy and this buildup of this fuel. It almost is like a lawnmower that sits in the garage when the fuel's been sitting there for the wintertime. The fuel almost goes bad. It gets kind of like gunked up and I don't know if that's a totally accurate analogy to use here, but bottom line is you're left with this lactic acid and this need to stop because your pathways are all clogged up with this fuel that your body can't even use. You don't even have the oxygen, just like a motor. Like if you have a lawnmower or a trimmer or some small engine, or even a car, if you can't get oxygen into that fuel, the fuel can't burn, and then it just kind of drowns on itself. And this exact thing happens with our body. So if we are aerobically developed and we are delivering oxygen in our blood, then that pyruvate molecule can be broken down further in the mitochondria, and you're left with 36 ATP. So we go from 2 to 36 in the sugar. So this is where the magic of fitness happens when you're talking about endurance sports or anything that lasts longer than a few minutes. This oxygen process, this aerobic process, is the bulk of the energy. Now, if you're a sprinter, if you're Usain Bolt and you're going for 10 seconds, 9 seconds in his case, then this anaerobic thing is really important. You need to get your body to clear out the pyruvate and but it's still going to use it. This may be prioritized. So this is the key discovery that I had after talking to my dad and really digging into the science and going back to this book, Training for the Uphill Athlete. That's really where I learned this stuff. And, I've spent the years kind of vetting it and making sure that it was accurate information, which it is. So the high intensity is like salt. That's how I like to explain it. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a really good thing to train your anaerobic system. And it's also a good thing to run fast sometimes. But like salt can make a meal or a dish taste amazing when it's done right. When you start pouring on salt all over this is one of my favorite things to make. It's like a stir fry vegetable or rice dish. If you add too much salt, you're going to ruin it. It's going to become overwhelming. And it's the same thing with high intensity training. It has to be done in moderation. It has to be done in just the right amount. And the amount that you do it is actually much less than almost everybody thinks it is, unless they are an advanced runner. And this is just something that I think is game changing for human health. If people understood this more, for the reasons we'll get into, their lives will be better because they will be fitter and they will understand how their bodies work and how to get the response that they're looking for, rather than going out for a run, slamming themselves every time, coming back, in extreme pain and thinking that that's going to get them where they want to be. And that's just not the truth. So there's these key training zones, and these zones I like to call green, yellow, and red. In the green zone, this is where you're giving your body plenty of oxygen. You're able to breathe easily. It's a calm intensity. You're not struggling too much. If you have to walk, that's fine. I walk a lot on my runs, especially if you're trail running. That it's a very sustainable pace. It's something that you could hold for hours if your muscles could hold up. The middle zone, and most of the energy is coming from your fat storage when you run at a very low intensity. If you're well trained, actually, most of it comes from fat. There are situations where we teach our bodies to burn so much sugar by exercising high intensity all the time, that even when we go easy now, our body needs to use that anaerobic process more and more. And that leads to this kind of, vicious cycle. So the middle zone is where it's mixed fat and sugar. And that pyruvate is what I'm going to call the lactate levels, that lactic, that's a fuel level, but your body is able to utilize that pyruvate, that lactate. And so it stays under control when you're in this middle zone. And that's how most people train. When most people train, they're training right here where they can sustain it for a while, but it's pretty uncomfortable. It's almost like you're racing. It's that feeling of no pain, no gain. And then of course you have what is called the red zone, which is most of your energy is coming from sugar at this point. Your body doesn't have enough oxygen. You're not able to breathe in the oxygen, and your heart is unable to get that oxygen to your muscles. And so you get this byproduct building up, and you cannot last longer than a few minutes when you're going beyond your lactate threshold. And everybody can kind of intuitively find where that is, because where your clock's ticking when you go out and do a workout. So these are the key areas. And really for fitness and to become better and healthier, and I would argue happier, you want to find these two markers. You want to find this aerobic zone, and you want to do 80 to 90% of your training in this easy zone. That's a lot. That means if you're running for 9, let's say you have 10 hours of training, 9 hours of it should be at a very comfortable, easy pace. I mean, go back to my dad's advice of, hey, run the week, and then maybe one day a week you can go push it a little bit. So what he may have not known all the science behind it, but he was right on. He wanted me to stay mostly in this green zone and then trickle into these other ones. And maybe I should have drawn these with a little bit of a different weight here. But so the key is finding those. So how do we find these aerobic threshold? And this is where some data science is going to come into it and some fun things that you can do. But how do we find these zones? One is you can just feel it. Okay. You can go out and just say, where am I running easy? Where does my breathing start to feel just slightly more strained? That's going to be your aerobic threshold. Your lactate's going to be where you're running hard, but you could hold it. And then once you go beyond that, that's going to be over your lactate. And it's pretty, you can do this if you pay attention to yourself. If you want to be a little bit more rigorous, you can start gathering data. And here's some data that I gathered. What we did was we turned on a treadmill and we slowly increased the treadmill. And as the treadmill increased, my heart rate increases as well. And as that intensity goes up, we measure by, you prick your finger and you get a drop of blood, and it's just like a glucose meter. You put it in this little meter and you test your lactate, and it tells you how much is in your blood. And once you get beyond a certain point of intensity, your body can no longer keep up with the production of this pyruvate molecule, this lactate. And so the lactate grows and the level of it just gets higher and higher. So you can see here, if I run at 170 beats per minute, this is after a lot of aerobic training, I've actually been able to move this way up on the intensity scale. So I can run pretty hard at 170 and not be building up these pyruvate molecules. My body is using those. That's one way we can get this data. There's another really amazing, this is my favorite thing to do, and I wish it was a little more accessible. You can go to a lab and get what's called a respiratory exchange rate test. And basically what this is it measures how much carbon dioxide out you breathe over the amount of oxygen in. It's this equation right here. And this respiratory exchange rate ratio is indicative of how much carbohydrate and fat you are burning. So if the ratio gives you 0.7, it means almost all of the energy that you are using is coming from fat. If you get a respiratory exchange rate of 1, where the carbon dioxide to oxygen in is 1-to-1, that means you're at 100% sugar burn. And the reason that we know this is through the actual chemical balance equations of this is a sugar molecule burning. And you can see that it takes 6 oxygens in, it breaks the sugar molecule, you get 6 carbon dioxides out, you get some water, and you get energy. And look at how clean these byproducts are. You got carbon dioxide, you breathe it out, and oxygen out, carbon dioxide out and water. And that's the same when you do fat. But notice you take more oxygen in for fat burn, and then you get 129 ATP, and you can see that the process is pretty much the same. The oxygen's going in, but the ratio of oxygen in and carbon dioxide out is 0.7 for the fat if you were to run these numbers, and 1 for sugar. That's amazing, because when we actually measure these gases coming out of the tube, you can see in this picture on the right, the gas that comes out of this tube goes into the machine, and it's amazing. Like when you start up and you're going easy, you see exchange rates that are down there near 0.7. And as you get to your max, you'll start topping out at about 1. And I've done this, and it's just an amazing test. So that's a way you can start to learn how your body reacts. Here are the results of mine. So you can see here as my heart rate, as I start up in a really low heart rate zone where my heart rate's like less than 120 beats per minute, you can see I'm burning a lot of fat in this area. And then it kind of levels off. And this is interesting to me. I'm still trying to make sense of this really flat area where I seem to burn the same amount of almost the same amount of energy as I do when I run at 136 versus 152. But because I've been aerobically training for years now, I don't change to sugar burn until I get way up at my lactate threshold where I'm really pushing it hard. And that's what you want. You can see here, this is the percentage of energy. So as carbohydrate goes up, the fat comes down. In grams, you can see the blue is the sugar burn and the fat is the red. Now, if you're looking carefully, you might see that why is the carbohydrate higher than the fat burn in grams per minute, when up here it's saying that 66% of my energy is coming from fat and only a third of it is coming from carbohydrate. Well, there's 2 times the amount of calories in a gram of sugar than there is of fat. So you got to multiply this one by 2-to-1, and then you can see that it equals these ratios here. And you can get all kinds of stuff about the volumes of gases that you're exhaling. You can go crazy as a data scientist on this stuff because it really is fascinating. So kind of changing gears here to the final part of this presentation. So if you're into this and you want to do it, and you're a data scientist and maybe you're watching this video after, or maybe you're here listening, you can go buy a watch. These are some of the main brands that are out there: Polar, Suunto, Coros, Garmin. All of these watches work great. And I would recommend using a heart rate strap that pairs over Bluetooth with your watch. Don't try to use the optical heart rate sensors. They do work a lot of the time, but once they get off, they kind of get lost in the weeds. And if it's cold or rainy, the water gets in there. It's not as reliable. So use a heart rate strap for now until that technology matures a little bit more. And then hook it up to a service called Strava. Strava it's a free service. You can pair it with your phone and it'll pull all your data in. And then you can use the APIs that Strava provides. You can go to developers.strava.com and get your data. That way you're not having to go into all the complexities of each of these, where each one of them is different and some of them are locked down. Like Garmin doesn't even give you access unless you apply for it. So just go through Strava and you can pull your data and then you can do what you want with it. So you can do things like pulling the distance, the duration, the elevation, your heart rate, what time of day it is, what the GPS lat long, the slope angles, all kinds of things. And then lactate and RER results, those are things that you'd have to do on your own that your watch is not going to measure for you. I'm going to do this slide quickly, but here's some interesting, what I did is I took all the data from all of my runs over the years and I broke them into 4 groups. This one is downhill running in blue, flat running in orange, uphill running in green, and then very steep uphill power hiking in red. And you can see that over the years, you can see my flat running was at about 0.8. This is meters per heartbeat. This goes back to that efficiency rating. You can see I'm already, fast forward from 2016 over to 2022. It goes up and down with the seasons, of course, but you can see that I'm running almost 20% faster than I used to in most of these metrics, which is pretty satisfying. And the thing that I just love about it is that, knowledge is power. Like you really can pay attention to science, pay attention to data, and draw conclusions from that data and have it help you in your life. It's not a waste of time. It's not just something that geeks like to do to entertain themselves. It really is. Knowledge is power and can help us in the things that we need to do. So in conclusion, the takeaways from me would be, this is all about how I feel like I've become a healthier, happier person through this process of trail running and combining it with the science and the data. Low intensity builds this extremely important aerobic fitness. It's counterintuitive. You think that you're wasting your time when you do it. You can't imagine why this easy effort that you're doing is getting you anywhere. Trust me, mark your own data and go try it for 5-6 months and watch what happens. It's subtle, and if you don't mark your data, you may dismiss it because you may not ever see that tide is rising. High intensity is good too. I'm not saying that high intensity is a terrible thing. Just remember that it has to be. If you start overdoing it, you're gonna ruin your aerobic base because you can't train both of those systems at the same time. So you have to pick and choose. And the anaerobic high intensity, that'll train very quickly. The aerobic stuff takes much more consistency, much more long-term effort to build. And I'm seeing that over now years of progress. It's, that it just keeps building and I keep becoming a better runner, even though I'm getting older every year. So, blow off this idea of no pain, no gain. There are times when, sure, you'll feel up for going for it, and that's okay. Once again, just take it easy and make sure you do that wisely. As far as happier, how does this really make us happier other than our health? Of course, when we're unhealthy and we have issues with our bodies, that is a definite problem for our happiness. So that one's obvious, but aerobic training is fun. It's you go out with your friends, you have a great time. There's no pressure to feel like you need to go push beyond what you're feeling up for. Today I went for a run. It was 90 degrees outside. I went at 5 p.m. and I was feeling terrible. I had a big day yesterday. I got a big day getting ready for this today. And I just took it easy. It was low pressure and hey, no problem. I walked a lot, and the great thing is I'm still building my fitness every time I do that. So it creates this ability for you to have consistency and changes your lifestyle, because now you're not getting beat down every time you go, where it's this huge hang up and hard to get out. Instead, it starts to become something that heals you and is enjoyable. Mountain running has also helped me suffer better, because I've entered some races over the years that have really challenged me and challenged like my ability to, really pushing my limit of what I'm capable of. And what I've noticed is that it's taught me how to suffer better. It's taught me how to accept the situations I put myself in, and it's just been an awesome thing for me. And I really think that, doing this kind of fitness helps you really tune in to your data, and your data is yours. You're going to find nuances that are a little different for you than they are for me. And paying attention and looking at your heart rate and say, hey, my heart rate is really high today. What's going on? Like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that makes sense. I had a really stressful day today, and my body is telling me that. Like, it's amazing to be in tune. So with that, that basically concludes my message here. I do want to mention an app that we are working on. This is some new software. We're calling it Tracer, and it brings together a lot of these concepts, but it does have a secret sauce. So if anybody out there is watching this and maybe interested in this kind of stuff, feel free to reach out to me. I might be worth talking to you if your skill set and interest levels are in this kind of stuff. Yeah, there might be a chance to work on the software together. My contact information's right there. So go ahead and reach out. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for taking some time to listen to this message. And I hope that you learned something, and I hope that it can change your life, because it really has helped mine.
Awesome job, Joey. This is great. This is great. I never thought I would see glycolysis in one of my Pi Data talks. So, my PhD is in physiology. So this has been like great to actually see this and connect it to just everyday life. We had a question in the chat, wanted to know how often you run and what is the average time spent running?
Yeah, so I run depending on the season, but in the main, like when I'm training for something or I'm really trying to, improve my fitness, I would say I train anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a week. And then what I do is I'll do like 2 or 3 weeks where I'll hold it at 8, 9, 10 hours. Sometimes I'll go, if I'm in like a big week, I'll go up to 12. And then I will drop down on like a third week. I'll go through a recovery week and just let my body like get back, absorb all of that good training. And a lot of the best coaches out there will recommend kind of that modulation of increase your intensity over a few weeks and then drop it back down and let your body recover. So I'm typically 8 to 10 probably on a regular basis, sometimes more if I'm getting ready. The pros that are out there running, they're doing this for 20 plus hours a week at least. And that's why they are so good. And a bulk of it is easy running. It's just, they're just doing so much of it. And there's another side, which is the muscular breakdown side that we haven't talked about. You got to make sure your joints and your muscles are able to handle that much. And so you can't just dive into 20 hours a week, so you bring it up slowly. You pay really close attention to your body. And for some of you, that may be 3 hours a week. Some of you may be more like 6 or 7. Maybe you could get an hour a day. But the beauty of aerobic training is, hey, get on a bike that's low impact and pedal like while you're talking on the phone with somebody. I do that sometimes. I'll have a meeting and I'll just be on a trainer bike sitting there just pedaling, and I'm not winded, so I can sit there and have a meeting with somebody, and it's great. So it's a game changer when you start doing low intensity, because your volume can go way up and you don't have to be slammed by it.
So Nick wanted to know, how has your diet changed over the course of your training?
Oh man, that's a great question. Diet's a tough one for me, because I really believe you need the calories if you're going to be a runner or if you're going to be active. And that's one of the amazing things too, right? Like you can be less picky and less worried and less guilt uh, driven when you know that you're moving your body and your body is going through those fuel stores on a regular basis. You're not leaving your liver. Your liver is like a battery. It's like holding all this chemical energy in your body. And if you're cycling that, you're cleaning that out. You're not just letting it gunk up. I believe that like you can get away with a lot more flexible eating. I eat whatever I want, to be honest with you. I do really love like getting good food. I love like fruits and vegetables. I'm a big fan of like I've lately become a protein fan. I used to think that the protein, like the fitness industry, was just selling us protein just as a way to make money. Like, I don't really need that or whatever. But I have noticed over the last few months that protein can really help you recover if your legs are beaten down. So supplementing that is really good. So I would say I'm pretty loosey goosey on my diet, though. Some people are very strict. Some of the best runners in the world, they go to McDonald's. I hate to say it, but they do. I mean, I'm thinking of one, Courtney Dauwalter. She gets made fun of. She's the best female runner the world's ever seen, probably in these long endurance sports. Amazing. And yeah, she's eating like stuff that she likes because your body just needs it and you're turning over that energy. So, I'm not a pro. And by the way, I'm not a professional. Like I'm just an everyday, like my times are nothing to, there's pros out there that the beauty here though, is that the pros will agree with me. I've done my homework on this stuff and there's a big debate around the diet though. That one's a tougher question to answer conclusively.
Nick, did you want to come on the mic and just ask your next question?
Yeah, thank you. Again, wonderful presentation. This did scratch my data science data nerd itch. My follow-up question is like, have you heard of intermittent fasting? And if so, how does that affect aerobic training or just like general like exercising?
Yeah. Yeah, of course I've heard of intermittent fasting. I've utilized it in my training as well. It is a sharp sword, I would say. I would say, and this is just my take on it and what I've seen. There have been days when I've gone. I mean, I went for a 6-hour run one time, intentionally not eating. I did drink water and I did intake sodium so that my body would, stay electrolyte balanced. But I was able to go. When you go easy, your body's burning a lot of fat, and you're actually not driving your blood sugars down as fast as you would think, and so your body's able to kind of keep up and burn fat. So it's a great way to stimulate fat burn. I do think that works. I know one of the best trail runners in the world, his name's Kilian Jornet. He has utilized it, fasted training through his lifetime. But I do think you also have to be careful because your body needs those calories to replenish your muscles, to fix your muscles, to repair your muscles. And so if you're on like this constant intermittent fasting on a daily basis, it makes me a little nervous that you would overtrain yourself, that you would put yourself in a deficit, and that you would just, yeah, you might lose weight, but like, you got to ask yourself, like, where do you really want to be, and that can be dangerous to be at a calorie deficit over a long period of time. It can lead to some really bad disorders too. There's something called overtraining syndrome that wrecks people. Like some of the best runners in the world have succumbed to this idea of overtraining. And that's what I was saying about this high intensity. They get so aerobically fit that they're able to run like, you look at these guys like Eliud Kipchoge, these marathoners that are doing 2-hour marathons, and they're able to do that aerobically, but that doesn't mean they're not burning a lot of energy. And so it's a double-edged sword. I think you can utilize it, but in my opinion would be to be very careful and to use it strategically when needed, and be careful to recover really well after.
Also, are there resources on how to learn about that, what you just spoke of? how to use intermittent fasting more strategically?
Yes, there are. I would say go to the web and start doing some searching. You're going to get differing. This is the challenge here with this question. There are various coaches out there, and each of them have different methodologies. And some of them, like Scott Johnston and Steve House from Training for the Uphill Athlete, that book that I showed, they really like fasted training. But if you go to, say, a guy named David Roach, who has also had a lot of success in training people, he's much more careful about it. He's saying, no, we got to be really careful about having people running in a fasted state. So it kind of depends on who you're talking to. And I wish I knew all the answers. This is why I love this topic. There is still so much for data scientists to go do research in this kind of stuff and to really truly understand it, because I think we're always looking for that. So there's no easy answer on that. I would say get out there and start researching, maybe experiment with yourself a little bit and see what works for you, and maybe what can you find.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? All right.
Wait, I have a question. Joey, this is Dustin.
Hey, Dustin.
We've talked about a lot about the science of the health issues and trading issues here. Like, do you have some go-to tools that you like to use for analyzing this data in Python?
Yeah, for sure. So what I do to analyze data, well, actually with this new software that we're building, we have a Postgres database, and we're pulling the data through the Strava APIs into the Postgres database. And then that's great because we can query it, we can grab whatever we need, and we just go in Python and connect to the database, pull it in. But if you want to do something a little lighter weight, one great way to do it would be to sign up for Strava, use the API in Strava, and talk to me after, and I can show you how to use Google Docs, Google Sheets. You can click a little menu button and it'll go out to the Strava API and grab the data that you care about and pull it right into your spreadsheet. And then you could just export that to a CSV and load it into Python. And so that's taking care of your database side. Or if you want to get real official, you could throw up a database somewhere and pull the data more formally into something like that if you really want to get fancy with it. Once it's in Python, pandas for sure, it makes it super easy to just do the typical operations we need to do with plotting data and starting to do some math operations on it. The nice thing about using pandas over, say, something like NumPy is that NumPy, the indexing in pandas, really, once you understand it, like in NumPy, the index of where you put it in the array is the index, right? But in pandas, you can attach it to a timestamp, and then if they get mixed up, when you subtract two records or something, they always align by index, and I found that helps a lot. So definitely pandas. Plotting tools, Matplotlib is awesome, as you know. There's also Plotly, which has come a long way and become really easy to use. And so, yeah, just all the typical stuff that Python data scientists use. Of course, like machine learning stuff, TensorFlow, PyTorch, scikit-learn if you want to do something really fancy. I've done some cool stuff with clustering my runs and classifying them in different ways and things like that. So yeah, it's really the typical stuff. NumPy and pandas and a plotting library will get you a long way with this stuff.
Cool. Quick follow-up. Are you so in this new application you're developing, are you using any AI or ML tools to understand the zones?
I can't say publicly exactly what we're doing, but yeah, there's definitely some AI ML magic going on that is going to be really cool. So yeah, that's all I should say publicly right now.
All right, cool. Thanks, Joey.
Yep.
Dustin, you took my question. My next question was, so can't you, obviously, couldn't you, using early data to actually predict when you're entering into those zones, or are those areas where you swap between aerobic and anaerobic metabolism, and you should be able to do that with early time points, right, to actually forecast out pretty far. So I know you don't want to discuss that, but it's definitely that area that's be very interesting to hear more about whenever you're ready to talk about that.
Yeah, and I can say that the challenge with using ML for zone classification is that your zones are actually somewhat dynamic. Like they're not always the same every day. And like here's a little data experiment you all can do that's pretty interesting. Put on a heart rate strap, connect it to your watch so you're seeing what your heart rate is in real time. Turn on your watch and go sit in a hot tub and just let your body get really hot. And you'll see your heart rate come up by like 15 beats per minute. Then get out and make sure you're holding still and in the same position. And then go get in a colder pool and look at your heart rate, and it'll come back down. And you can literally go back and forth. I mean, at least it is for me. So I've done this experiment on myself. I can't say that I've done it with other people. So, go out and try it. But my point in telling you that is that the environment affects your heart rate, your stress levels. Are you battling a virus? You may not be sick, but you may be in the middle of fighting off a virus. All of these things can affect your heart rate. And so getting too hung up on exactly where your zones are can be a little bit of a problem. And so like the AI would have to take into account so many variables. It might be cool if you could get all that data in conveniently, like, what's the temperature outside and what's your stress levels like, and all of that kind of stuff would probably need to be an input to it. But those are some of the challenges with like heart rate based zones. The great way to do it is to really just pay attention to how you feel and get an idea of your average patterns, so that if it's a hot day and you're 5 or 10 beats over because it's so hot, you recognize what the cause and effect is. But yeah, there are so many places where ML and AI could be used. I really think this is an industry that's going to take off because there's so much great data that's automatically ingestible through these wearables. And now that data is ingestible, who knows what we're going to be able to do with it. I think it's going to be really exciting.
Cool. Do we have any more questions? So if not, let's thank Joy for this talk tonight. I really, really appreciate it. You're welcome to come back anytime and talk about things that are going on. All right. So
Larry, it's my pleasure. Thanks everybody who tuned in. And yeah, hit me up if you want to talk more about it. I live and breathe this stuff. I love it. So anytime.
So Joey, hang on. So hang on after everyone drops. I needed to speak to you one last time. So
yeah, sure. Thanks everybody. Have a great night.
Have a great night.